Media. The Talking Playground. In the heart of Beijing, where time folds over itself and the past breathes just beneath the surface, there is a playground that does not belong. It is modern, bright plastic slides, metal swings, the sound of children's laughter filling the air. But its roots sink deep, deeper than anyone dares to acknowledge. It was built across from an ancient cemetery, a burial ground that has cradled the bones of forgotten souls for over 4,000 years. Beneath the playground, beneath the laughter and the joy, there is sorrow, an old, aching sorrow that lingers in the very earth. Most people do not know, most people do not see. But on the night of the Chinese Lunar New Year, a festival older than empires, a festival that has marked the turning of time for nearly 9,000 years, the veil lifts, and those who were lost return. They call it the Talking Playground. It is an unspoken name, whispered in hushed tones, known only to those who have seen. If you go there on the Lunar New Year just before midnight, you will find them. Dozens, sometimes hundreds of people wandering among the swings and slides, walking slowly, their lips moving, their expressions solemn. At first, you might think they are mad, muttering to themselves, weeping softly into empty air, clutching at something invisible with trembling hands. But if you stand still, if you listen, you will feel it. The air is thick, heavy with something unseen, something sorrowful. They are not mad. They are speaking to the dead. And if you are there, you wait long enough, you may see her. She emerges from the mist like a ripple in time, her robes worn and frayed, her hair pinned in a style long forgotten. Her face is pale beneath the moonlight, her features delicate, beautiful but hollow, eyes sunken with grief, lips parted in quiet despair. She walks slowly, leading a child by the hand, a little one with dark, mournful eyes, their small fingers clutching hers as if afraid to let go. Sometimes, she carries a baby wrapped in mist, the child's tiny form barely visible beneath the shifting folds of something that is not fabric but memory. She will find you if she chooses. She will step forward, her sorrow pressing against your chest like a weight, an unbearable sadness that makes it hard to breathe. And then, in a voice like wind through ancient stone, she will ask, "Please, take my child, give them the life I could not." She does not beg, she does not force. But there is something in her eyes, something desperate, something pleading, a regret so deep it is stretched beyond death itself. And in that moment, you will feel it. The pain, the weight of centuries of suffering. If you hesitate, she will not move. She will simply wait, the child standing at her side, their little face unreadable, their gaze locked onto yours. You may see a flicker of something behind their expression, hope perhaps, or something darker. If you ask her why, she will tell you. In a voice soft and distant, she will speak of her life, of the hunger, the cold, the war, the sickness. She will tell you of a child born into suffering, a baby who cried weakly against her breast because there was no milk to give. She will tell you of hands trembling with exhaustion, of nights spent cradling a fevered forehead, whispering lullabies with a voice raw from pleading with the heavens. She will tell you of choices made in the dark, of waking to silence where once there was crying, of holding a small lifeless body, pressing one last kiss to a forehead that would never be warm again. Some mothers speak of famine, of years when the fields gave nothing, when there was no rice, no bread, nothing but dust and sorrow. They will tell you how they walked for miles with their children in their arms, looking for food, for mercy, for something to save them, only to find that the world had nothing left to give. They will tell you of small hands growing cold, of breath slowing, of eyes staring but no longer seeing. Some speak of war, of husbands taken in the night, of homes burned to the ground, of running, carrying their children through blood-soaked streets, only to realize too late that the child in their arms was no longer crying. Some say nothing at all, they simply weep. And the child, the ghost child, only watches. They do not cry, they do not speak, they only wait, their small hand held out, ready to be taken. If you say yes, if you reach out, if you accept the child into your arms, the mother will look at you with something close to relief. She will smile, just barely, and then she will dissolve, vanishing into mist, leaving nothing behind but the echo of her sorrow. And the child will be yours. You will not see them outside the playground, not fully, but you will feel them. You will catch glimpses, a shadow in your home where no one should be, a whisper from the next room, a chill against your skin in the dead of night. Sometimes in the quietest hours, you will hear small feet padding across your floor, the faint sound of breath that is not yours. They will follow you, always just out of sight, always waiting. That is why they return. The ones who walk the playground at night, the ones who wander, speaking softly into the empty air. They come because they are the only ones who can still see them, the only place where they can hold their ghost children, speak to them, comfort them. And then there are the others, the ones who regret, the ones who cannot bear it, the feeling of unseen hands slipping into theirs, the cold breath against their skin as they sleep, the weight of a presence that never leaves. They return to the playground, searching for the woman in the mist, begging her to take the child back. But she never does. She only gives. She never takes. And so, every year, the talking playground fills again, with those who seek, those who grieve, those who whisper to empty air beneath the full moon. And if you go there, if you listen closely, you will hear it. The laughter of children where no children stand, the rustling of cloth where no wind blows, the voices of the lost calling out in the night, forever waiting to be heard. Media. The price of knowing they say she appears only once a month, precisely at midnight, under the full moon's cold glow. No one knows where she comes from or where she disappears to, only that she is there and then she is not. You won't find her if you look for her. She finds you, and only if she chooses. It starts with a whisper in the trees, a shiver crawling up your spine, and a sudden certainty that something is watching from the darkness beyond the lamplight. Then, as if stepping out of the folds of the night itself, the old woman emerges. She is small, draped in tattered shawls that smell of earth and something faintly metallic. Her face a latticework of wrinkles too deep and too deliberate, as if something had carved them there rather than time. Her eyes glisten like wet stones, void of reflection, absorbing all light yet revealing nothing. Her hands, knobby, clawed things, tremble slightly, but her voice is steady, thick like syrup, impossibly old yet commanding. She does not call out to those who pass. She does not advertise her presence. And yet, they come. They always come. At first, you don't notice the pattern. The first time you see her, she is simply another strange old woman muttering in the park. The next time you see a man approach her, his face tight with desperation, kneeling before her as if in worship. You watch as she whispers something into his ear, her lips barely moving, and in that instant, the man stiffens, his eyes widening with something indescribable. He stumbles away without a word, trembling, gripping his wrist tightly as if preparing for something inevitable. The next month, he returns. He is missing a hand. No one speaks of the price, but you begin to see it in the shadows that linger around her. The park is no longer just a park. It is a hunting ground, not for her, but for those who seek her. They arrive hours before midnight, waiting, lurking, pacing. They are restless, hungry. Their eyes dart from shadow to shadow, hoping for a glimpse of her, terrified they might miss her. Some are on crutches, hobbling forward with reckless urgency. Some sit in wheelchairs, their bodies ravaged by unseen decisions. Some are blind, their milky, sightless eyes staring blankly ahead as they listen intently for her approach. Others, many others, are missing limbs, their sleeves pinned neatly at the shoulder, their pant legs empty below the knee. And yet, they return, again and again. One night, you see a young woman, no older than 20, her face gaunt with exhaustion, her leg missing from the knee down. You watch as she listens intently, nods once, and leaves without hesitation. The next month, she returns in a wheelchair, her other leg gone. The month after that, she has only one arm. The next, she controls her chair with her chin. And still, she comes. It is not money she takes. It is not favors. She does not barter, does not negotiate. The knowledge she gives is absolute, final, and it demands something in return. No one speaks of what they learn. No one dares. The only proof of its worth is in their return. You try to ignore it. You try to push it away, but the thought lingers, festering. What could be so valuable that they would give up their own bodies piece by piece? What knowledge could be worth the unraveling of their flesh? You do not realize it at first, but you have already started looking for her. Each full moon, you find yourself drawn to the park, wandering the paths, ears straining for that whisper, for that unnatural stillness that signals her arrival. And then, one night, she finds you. She is exactly as you imagined and yet nothing like you expected. You feel your stomach turn, your pulse thunder in your ears, but your feet refuse to move. You are frozen beneath her gaze, trapped in the gravity of something ancient, something inescapable. She tilts her head slightly, as if peering into your soul, and then impossibly, she smiles. You already know what you want, she says, her voice the rasp of dead leaves against stone. And you do. Your mouth is dry. Your body screams at you to run, to leave, to forget. But you cannot. You lean in as she does, her breath icy against your skin, and she whispers. The moment the words touch your ears, the world around you shifts. Something inside you unravels, something you did not even realize was tied. Your stomach drops, your hands shake, and you understand. You understand everything. And then, she is gone. The next morning, you wake with a weight in your chest that wasn't there before. You cannot unhear it. You cannot unknow it. It festers, eats at you, a splinter too deep to remove. You tell yourself you will not return. You tell yourself you do not need to know more. The next full moon, you are in the park, and you have already decided which part of you can live without. Media. The Cemetary Road. For 25 years he drove the same road twice a day, 5 days a week. The cemetery was just another part of the landscape, a gray smear of headstones and gnarled trees barely noticed between the exits. It stretched for miles alongside the highway, a forgotten city of the dead, shadowed by office buildings and factories. He never thought much about it. Sometimes on foggy mornings he would glance over and see the mist curling between the graves, moving strangely, as if something unseen were shifting beneath it. Other times, in the late afternoon, the sun would set behind the tallest monuments, casting long, skeletal fingers of shadow across the ground. But he never looked for long. There was traffic to watch, meetings to prepare for, calls to take. The cemetery was just another thing he passed by. Until the accident. It happened in the blink of an eye. A distracted driver, some kid, phone in hand, eyes on the glowing screen, plowed into him at 70 miles per hour. The world went white, then red, then nothing. When he woke up, he was in the hospital, tubes in his arms, ribs shattered, skull fractured. He almost died. He should have died. They told him later that the first responders were amazed he survived. But something had changed. Something had followed him back. 2 months later, he was back on the road, back to the same commute, the same routine, the same long drive past the cemetery. The first time he heard the voices, he thought it was the radio, a faint murmur just beneath the static, a whisper of something just outside the edge of hearing. He turned the dial, but the sound didn't go away. It wasn't coming from the radio. It was coming from outside, from the cemetery. At first, it was just fragments, snatches of conversation, words lost in the wind. Then the voices became clearer. Money is meaningless. It was a man's voice, old, tired, carrying the weight of decades of regret. He flinched, his hands tightening on the wheel. His eyes darted to the cemetery, but there was nothing there. Just the graves, endless and unchanging. He swallowed and told himself he was imagining things. The accident had rattled his brain, left him with some lingering concussion symptoms. That was all. The next day, the voices returned. Your time is precious. Stop pissing it away for money. This time, it was a woman, her voice sharp with anger. Or was it grief? He glanced at the cemetery again, and for just a second, only a second, he thought he saw movement between the stones. A flicker of something pale, shifting behind the graves. The voices grew stronger, more distinct, and they weren't just speaking in generalities anymore. They were telling him things that made his stomach twist. They don't give a damn about you. They're just using you, robbing you of your life's energy. I gave them 30 years of my life, and they fired me 2 weeks before retirement to avoid paying my bonus. He clenched the wheel, his knuckles white. He had worked at his company for 25 years. And how many times had he seen it? The layoffs, the terminations just before pensions kicked in, the people who had poured their souls into the job only to be discarded like garbage. The voices weren't just talking to him, they were talking about him. He started hearing them every day. Each time he passed the cemetery, they reached for him, their whispers curling through the cracks in his mind. He heard men who had spent their lives in offices, working themselves to death for nothing. He heard women who had sacrificed everything for families that barely remembered them. He heard the desperate regrets of those who had been consumed by their own ambition, their love of wealth, their hunger for status. And then there were the children. The first time he heard a child's voice, something inside him broke. "Daddy, don't work. I miss you. Come home." His vision blurred. His hands trembled. He could barely keep the car on the road. "You promised we'd go to the park, but you never came. You were always too busy. I was scared, but you weren't there." The memories slammed into him. His daughter's birthdays missed because of meetings. The nights he came home too late to tuck her in. The times she had begged him to stay just a little longer, and he had told her he couldn't, that work was too important. He thought he had been doing the right thing, providing, building a future. But now, with these voices filling his head, he saw the truth. He had traded moments he could never get back for something that never really mattered. He stopped sleeping. The voices followed him into his dreams, whispering their regrets, their warnings. The cemetery had become a wound in the world, bleeding into his mind. He couldn't escape it. Then one night, as he drove home, he saw them. They stood along the edge of the cemetery, just beyond the rusted iron fence. Pale figures, barely more than silhouettes, watching him as he passed. Their faces were lost in shadow, their eyes empty, hollow. He didn't want to see them, but he couldn't look away. And then, as he reached the end of the cemetery, one of them stepped forward. A woman, her face lined with sorrow, her hand clutching something small, a child, a boy no older than 5. The boy turned his head, and for a fraction of a second, their eyes met. His son who had never been born, his son who his wife had lost 20 years ago in a pregnancy that ended too soon, a child who had never had a chance to live. And yet, he was there, watching, waiting. The man slammed the brakes, his breath ragged, his body shaking. When he looked again, they were gone, but the voices remained. "Time is the only thing that matters. Don't waste it." He didn't go to work the next day, or the day after. He quit his job. He went home to his wife, to his daughter. He spent the days with them, real days, not stolen hours between obligations. He didn't know if the voices would ever leave him. He didn't know if the cemetery would ever stop whispering. But he knew one thing: he wasn't going to be one of them.